Joining us now to discuss the latest on the indictment of former President Donald Trump. Now, the third indictment is Congressman Glenn Ivey. He's a member of the Judiciary Committee. He's here to give the Democratic perspective. Congressman, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So perhaps let's start out. I want to get your reaction to some of the claims that Republicans are making. Some of the arguments that Republicans in the 2024 presidential field are making. They're claiming that it is weaponization of the Department of Justice, very much portraying Donald Trump as if he is the victim of this situation. I know Democrats obviously have a very different perspective on this. So let's start with that. What's your perspective on this indictment?
Well, I thought the indictment was a very powerful statement of all of the things that need to be laid out to prove guilt on these four counts. And, it looks like there's very strong evidence and extensive evidence. And the key part of this, too, is most of the witnesses, if not all of the witnesses, it appears, are going to be Republicans, and not just Republicans generally, but Republicans he either picked to be in his administration, worked closely with, retained to represent him as counsel, but people he had very close personal relationships with who are providing this evidence. So I think it's hard to talk about it as, the witch hunt and it's politicized and all of this stuff. And the weaponization piece, I think, is it's kind of ridiculous at this point, especially given the way that he abused the Department of Justice and tried to. And you can see that in the indictment here. He was trying to get the Department of Justice to lie and say there were open investigations of voter fraud and the like. That's weaponization. This is prosecution. This is holding someone accountable who broke the law, and not just in a minor or general way, but really attempted to overthrow the American democracy and steal an election from the person who'd won by 7 million plus votes. So I think it's, they got to find something to say. It's really instructive that they never do much to directly rebut the actual facts of what are alleged in the indictment. Like, they never say there was no false slate of electors. They never say he didn't lean on Pence or Raffensperger or some of these other elected officials to try and lie and say that the election was in play or that there was massive voter fraud. But you're going to have to do that in a trial. If you don't, you're going to be convicted and go to jail.
And let's look at it perhaps from the other angle now as to whether or not you feel this indictment encompasses all the aspects that it needs to. Obviously, we could see more indictments as well, but with this one in particular, obviously, there's not as many counts as perhaps some people might have been expecting. Again, do you think this encompasses what it needs to?
I mean, I think it's more than sufficient. They didn't include, for example, the insurrection charge, but that would have been harder to prove and might have implicated more First Amendment issues than you've got with these charges. And if he's convicted on any of these four counts, he'll be facing extensive jail time, and appropriately so. And my sense is that the prosecutor selected the charges that gave him the best chance to get convictions and avoid distractions with the jury, and streamline the case and see if they can move it relatively quickly and try and get it done, I would hope, before the general election next November.
And just lastly here, before we conclude, yourself as an attorney, as a member of the House Judiciary Committee, what are you expecting on the other indictments, given that we know there could be more as it relates to potentially Georgia? You could have more arise as it relates to some of the other indictments, as well as some of them advance onto a trial. So I guess, what are you expecting to take place, and what could it mean from a legal perspective for the former president?
Well, I think he's already facing 3 indictments and a civil case, and so he's got a lot of exposure with respect to potential jail time. The Georgia case sounds like it overlaps to some extent with the federal case, or the Georgia focus of the federal case that was just charged. But both can move forward at the same time, or on parallel tracks. And I think there could be other charges, certainly for some of these co-conspirators. I wouldn't be surprised if all of them end up being indicted and prosecuted. So the exposure that Trump faces is extensive. The evidence against him is, I think, overwhelming, especially in this most recent case. The Republicans have chosen to stick with him, and it looks like he's going to be their nominee for president. I guess they're just decided they want to, stay on the Titanic and do this trip again, just like they did in 2020. So, but look, for Democrats, it's important to make sure we're continuing to push forward a positive agenda. The economy's turning around. I think President Biden's done a good job there. I think foreign policy's back on track. Our NATO allies respect us again, and the war in Ukraine is moving not as fast as we'd like, but it's moving in the right direction. And as we roll out a lot of the things that were passed in the last Congress, building new infrastructure like roads and bridges, expanding internet access, bringing microchips and other types of manufacturing back to the United States. I think that all of that will start to help us to win him additional support among American voters. So I'm optimistic about our chances, but obviously that'll be up to the voters to decide, and we got a long ways to go between now and then.
All right, we'll leave it there. Maryland Democratic Congressman Glenn Ivey, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.